Sorry, could you just explain again what the superstructure is? Is it the culture and the cultural institutions?
Everything.
Okay, thanks.
In with the development of agriculture, you get a surplus, but you also have much more complex societies. You start populations grow much larger, and you start to get governments and laws and organized religion and military and police to maintain the relationships and keep those in power. In the modern world, we tend to accept that capitalism, that some people, some individuals have the right to control the vast wealth of the planet as just the way things have to be. That becomes the ideology that supports the private ownership of the means of production. So, as a materialist, Harris and Diamond are looking at how the institutions grow out of the economic relationship, but how the institutions also shape it. Now, some Marxists argue that it's a tit for tat, that the institutions always follow the economic relationships. Harris doesn't say that. Harris argues that they're shaped, the institutions, by the economic relationships, but they also can have their own independent existence as long as they don't undermine the economic relationships. Institutions can change as the economy changes. And a good example is the Roman Catholic Church. It started off as a religion of the slaves. It becomes the state religion in the Roman Catholic Empire. With the breakup of the empire, it becomes the broker between competing states. And in the modern era, it survives by providing services like schools, hospitals, and moral guidance. However, today it faces a crisis because its moral guidance has been undermined by internal division and scandal, and its inability to recruit clergy. Modern electoral democracies developed in the 19th century and seemed to be the dominant form of government in nation states during the second half of the 20th century. However, today, they face challenges from nationalist populist movements and authoritarian movements because of their inability to address economic globalization. So, will democracy survive? Can democracy exist independently of capitalism? It's unclear. But again, the relationship between the institutions and the economic organization is what we call the relationship between the base and the superstructure. The base is the foundation. The superstructure is the rest of the building. Now, crises in capitalism have come before, and capitalism has tended to weather them. This poem comes from January 1919, at the end of World War I, when the poet William Butler Yeats, who was a Protestant Irishman, predicted the second coming and the collapse of civilization. Alana, could you read the poem for us with great feeling and passion?
Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosened upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed and everywhere. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming, hardly are those words out, when a vast image of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight, somewhere in sands of the desert. A shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it, real shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born?
Yeats, reflecting on World War I and post-war revolutions, thought that civilization will collapse. It didn't. It did produce the Great Depression, and it did produce World War II. It did produce repeated genocides. But capitalism was eventually able to stabilize. So one big question: can capitalism and its institutions stabilize, or will it collapse in chaos? Yeats predicted it in 1919. It seemed it was happening during the Depression and World War II, but then capitalism stabilized as a system. Today, there are tremendous problems with climate change and with pandemic, rising nationalist movements, rising authoritarian movements. Is capitalism coming to a crisis, or will it be able to stabilize? Harris's argument is that unless it stabilizes, unless it changes its superstructure to correspond to a globalized base, crisis will happen. Part of the discontinuity between superstructure and base is that the economic production is now global, while social services and decision-making remain rooted in state, local. So we have a superstructure that's organized locally and an economic base that's organized globally. They may not line up well. We may be looking at the second coming. Jason?
I just want to say, so isn't, with capitalism though, a crash is inevitable, because clearly you can't have constant growth because there has to be a cap or a limit. So you have a lot of growth and then a crash, and then it comes back up and goes back down. Isn't that normal for capitalism? Or are you saying that that is not sustainable over an extended period of time?
Well, does anybody else want to address that?
And actually, I want to add something to what I said real quick. I know some people say that with climate change, oh, well, one model is, oh, businesses will have to adapt because, people in business have children and they understand that there's a future. But then the contrary to that is, well, if they did, they would have already done it. So I'm not saying I agree or disagree with that, but I have heard that before.
Capitalism is cyclical. And part of the problem is that Chris Heilig, you want to speak on, and then Anwar.
All right. I was